Good morning to the friends of the law offices of Brent Williams-Ruth. I am Brent Williams-Ruth, and I'm coming today to predict catastrophe for the economy. Actually, I've been predicting catastrophe for the economy for the last 3 years, but now there's been another major step towards that, and I just wanted to share my thoughts, create a record for posterity, and say that I hope I'm wrong. Let's start with what's going on. This morning, I saw on the news, mostly from Good Morning America and my local uh, uh, TV station affiliates in their morning news, that the building known as, I believe it's called 555 California Street in San Francisco, has formally asked their mortgage holders for assistance, revisions, pausing, whatever the official term is, on their $1.2 billion mortgage. So let me back up. When COVID hit and we went into lockdown and people started working from home, there were a lot of companies, including law firms, that have older populations that were very technologically adverse. In fact, when I first became a lawyer 21 years ago, I joined an old established law firm in the insurance world that fought tooth and nail against me getting a BlackBerry, if you remember those. In fact, I had to do it under my own cost. They wouldn't help at all. And they like, oh no. And I'm like, this will actually just make it easier for me to be able to respond to your messages when I'm out of the office and when I'm on breaks from depositions or whatever, and stay in touch. But they were completely against it. And now look where we are 20 years later. COVID forced a bunch, and I'm just going to say it, a bunch of old white men to learn how to Zoom, to Teams, to Google Chat, to do all the things with a video camera and their laptop, and realized, oh, hey, this isn't that bad. And then they started seeing the value of not having an office for associates. Like, wait a minute, I can still have an associate work from me, have them do all their work from their own home with a laptop and not have to have the square footage, which means more money in my pocket. Because if you didn't know, the way law firms work in a very rudimentary way is the equity partners at the top of the food chain get all the profits after paying off the expenses. And those profits can be very handy and tidy sums. And one of the biggest overhead costs outside of salary and benefits is rent. And when everything used to be paper, there were hundreds and thousands of square feet in offices, the internal space, that were file rooms where you had to keep files and paying. Even when you had closed files, you still had to maintain your file for a certain number of years. That would go off to a long-term archive where you again are paying for storage. And then all the people on the outside with the views and the windows, those were the attorneys, paralegals, and what have you. Well, whoopsie doodle. Here we have a system where people are still working. They're working from home. They're not having to commute. And so they're getting more hours in. And partners are like, wait a minute. We can have 4 or 5 offices instead of 30, have a much smaller footprint, make a lot more money. So when I started talking to my old colleagues and hearing that's exactly what's happening, they're like, yeah, we have a lease and it's going to run through 2023, 24, 25, 26. But as soon as it's over, we're going to cut down our square footage by 60, 70, 80%. And I thought, okay, this is what is going to lead to the collapse of our economy next. Because all of these downtown offices, and this has nothing to do with progressive states or non-progressive states, any place where there is a high-rise tower, there are going to be people who own that tower who are wanting to own more towers and become real estate moguls and build up their giant lifestyle of being billionaires. But it's all on a pyramid. And back in my history, I once actually was involved in litigation involving the secondary mortgage market, the what's called mortgage-backed securities. And I got to see exactly how that worked. And I'm going to give a brief example. So all of these, take 7 skyrise towers. You got a super tall one that's 80 stories tall, you got one that's 40, and you got one that's 10, and you got one that's 15. They each have different ratings. Office buildings are graded like class A, double A, B, C, whatever, based on their age, amenities, what have you. The owners of those take out mortgages. Well, the banks that give those mortgages are wanting to then make more money. So they sell the mortgage to Wall Street and they bundle them. And you're going to have people buying, investing into a bundle of property, because one building in and of itself is a risk, because that building one year may make a ton of money and then have a vacancy and they can't sell it. Because commercial real estate on a large scale, not a small scale like me, one person just going around saying, hey, I need an office space for one person, but large 20, 30, 40, 50, 200, 300, 400,000 square feet, that takes time. Those are deals that are negotiated and build outs happen, and it's a process, which is why most commercial real estate leases have notice provisions regarding an intent to either cancel the lease if you're not going to renew, or if there's going to be a substantial reduction or change in the terms. All right, let's bring it back to current. Oh, so then those get bundled together, and there's going to be some that they expect are going to win, lose, and the mortgage-backed security itself is going to ultimately make money. People make money off the investment in it. That's where the money comes to fund for the loans that are done, and that's where we're going to see problems. We're going to go back to the real-life example, 555 California. According to the news, they have a $1.2 billion mortgage. They're currently 93% leased. However, they have received news from their tenants that are saying that they are going to be dramatically changing that footprint of the leased space. That means that the owners will not be getting the rent to pay their mortgage obligations. See where I'm going? We have this double-edged sword. Rents got so expensive. The world was going up in such a great increase in value and everyone was making money. But then you're on a pinhead. It's that whole idea of how much emergency savings do you have if something goes wrong. In my last building in downtown Seattle was near the convention center, and there was a small little space that sold crepes. And the space was maybe 15 or 20 feet wide and maybe 10 feet deep. It's really can be like a newsstand or a place that sells crepes. There you go. How much are you going to pay for one crepe? There's a limit. And the landlord, they're going to charge their rent. The owner of that crepe restaurant needs to then have their people that they pay to make the crepes, but then also have enough to pay their rent and also be a profitable business for them to keep going. When the rents go up and the revenue doesn't, they're left with no choice but to close. When there was nobody to buy crepes, because there's no one in the tower upstairs, there's no money to be made. When there's no conventions, when there's no nothing, these people need those walking down the street that just say, hey, I want to have a crepe right now. It's not happening. So that goes away. Then the landlord doesn't have the money to cover that space. And then we have the dominoes. I believe that San Francisco is going to be the launch point for the next real estate crisis. It's already happening. I have knowledge because of my term as a member of the Washington State Bar Association Board of Governors regarding the sublease market in Seattle, Washington. there are literally millions of square feet of currently occupied and leased space where they are wanting to reduce that footprint and sublease to someone else. We also have new buildings that have come on the market. Well, what do you think is going to happen when the sublease or the lessor of that space is done with their lease? They're already wanting to sublease. Do you think they're going to keep their existing? No, they're not. So then that square footage is eventually going to come on the market and there's no one to fill it. And I'm not just talking about the restaurants and the retail on the ground level. I'm talking about what's upstairs in the towers. Because those are going to be empty. That means the retail is not going to have the people, which means they're not going to be able to charge the rent. So I'm going to fast forward to my dire prediction and say that today's announcement about the 555 California building is just the first of many to publicly say what's coming. And that is there's going to be bankruptcies, repossessions, foreclosures, because because the landlords, they can't reduce their rent. They want to reduce their rent to get more people in, but then they're in a bind and aren't making their monthly payment. And so they don't have the ability to go and do, because few people actually have liquid cash. Even billionaires, their billionaire debts are not the same as those who have just like a home mortgage. They're not looking for $1,800, $2,500, $3,000 a month for a mortgage. They're looking for $3 million. Well, they may have $6 million in cash, but that's 2 months of not making their rent. So there's going to be a major problem. And until such time as the debts get restructured or taken over, and that $1.2 billion mortgage is then, foreclosed upon and sold to someone else for $300 million, then allows a landlord to come in and say, you know what? We're going to lure people back into this space. And instead of charging you $80 per square foot triple net, we're going to offer you $35 per square foot triple net for this amazing Class A building, brand new, all the amenities, all the technology, shower, gym, charging stations for electric cars, all the things that people would want to lure people back in. But we are starting a road. And I will tell you that I'm going to be meeting with my own financial advisor and asking for an in-depth review of all the mortgage or the mutual funds that I'm part of to know where they're invested. This is the time where people wish they would have known before 2008 to pull their money out of the market or to make adjustments. This is that time. If you are in mortgage-backed securities, or if you're in a company that is in mortgage-backed securities, I believe that we are going to be seeing a real downturn. And there's not a whole lot of propping up that can be done by the government or anyone else. It just is going to happen. And, for all of the lessons that we learned in 2008, yeah, that was about a specific type of mortgage product sold to individuals. But the whole system didn't change. There was not a systemic structural restructuring of the whole system. They went after one thing and they're like, oh, we're going to limit how people can pull out home equity lines of credit. Again, we did what America does under a capitalist society, pushed it down to the individual person, but then left the rest of the system in place. So I think we're in for a real tough time. And the 555 California Street building is going to be just the first. And it's going to be nationwide, and it's going to be in red states and blue states and purple states and white states and black states and however your map is delineated. Even if you've got a map that has the United States flipped where north is south and south is north, doesn't matter. If you've got a city that's got towers that are more than 3 or 4 stories tall, that are owned by corporations and not just individual families and people, then there's going to be some problems. Because think about it. If you haven't ever known this, All of these spaces were once owned by individual families. And yes, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, yeah, that's how we got those amazing American families that then did so much good through their investments in later life, like the Carnegie libraries. Now it's corporations. And the corporations are to shareholders and to their executives. And once again, the heartbeat of American economy is going to fall hard onto the small business owners. And I understand to say that someone has 50, 60, 70 million dollars in assets and property to be small, but when you're comparing against people who have 4, 5, 6, 50, 70, 100 billion in property around the world, they're small because they're not the ones who are out there making these billion-dollar risky investments thinking it's going to pay off and that they're going to be ensconced in enough system and fail safes to make it a profitable investment for them. Like I said in the very beginning, I hope I'm wrong. I don't think that I will be. There's nothing, again, I started saying this back in 2020 and nothing has changed. I mean, you've had companies that are saying, you must return to work. You must have returned to work. But people are like, I'm not going to return to work. I mean, somebody even, I think it may have been Amazon, tried to even say, your return to work is essential for the small businesses in the retail level. And on a certain direct level, it's true. If there were 100,000 people who were working in office buildings in a metro area, and now it's down to 10,000, all of those small businesses, the gyms, the coffee, the independent coffee places, your flower shops, your restaurants and bodegas, they needed those people to be coming in to buy their breakfast, lunch, dinners, happy hours, whatever, to keep going. But again, there was a lot of pushback. And I don't want to. I want my work family life, and I don't want to go back to the days of commuting an hour and a half each way. I like that extra 3 hours. And so that's where we're going to be seeing the push and shove and how this is going to play out. I hope I'm wrong. All right, that's my prognostications for the day. It's June 14th, 2023. I'll come back to this in a couple of years and see where we are.